Canada is making a move that could quietly take away one of America's biggest advantages: U.S. Tariffs are pushing Canadian businesses to search for customers in Europe and Asia, and those doors are starting to open. If Canada builds strong enough trade ties overseas, Washington could discover that its biggest economic weapon no longer has the power it once did. American tariffs were meant to trap Canadian exports. Instead, they pushed them across the Atlantic. Canadian aluminum exports exploded 50.7% in a single month, with the metal flowing to the Netherlands, Italy, and Greece instead of the United States. Canadian oil is reaching Asia through a new Pacific pipeline. Canadian gas is heading to Germany on 20-year contracts. As Washington threatens a fresh 50% tariff wall, Canada is quietly replacing America one export market at a time. Canada's aluminum story is the clearest example of the shift. American tariffs made the US market more difficult for Canadian producers, so exporters started looking elsewhere. Reuters reported in May 2026 that Canada was pushing more aluminum toward Europe because European buyers were offering stronger premiums than the tariff-burdened American market could match. The metal did not stay stuck in North America waiting for the tariffs to lift. It found better-paying customers across the ocean, and Canadian producers followed the money. Canadian government data shows that unwrought aluminum and aluminum alloy exports jumped 50.7% in May 2026. Much of that increase went to the Netherlands, Italy, and Greece, European markets that had not been major destinations for Canadian aluminum before. A single-month surge of more than 50% is not a gradual drift. It is a rapid redirection of trade flows, driven by tariffs on one side of the Atlantic and premiums on the other. European buyers wanted Canadian aluminum, and they were willing to pay more for it than American buyers facing the same tariff-distorted market. The context that accelerated the aluminum shift was a global supply shock. The Iran war and disruptions to Middle Eastern shipping propelled aluminum prices higher worldwide, and Canada, already redirecting toward Europe to escape American tariffs, was perfectly positioned to capture that demand. When European buyers needed reliable supply and offered strong premiums, Canadian producers had already built the relationships to serve them. The tariffs meant to keep Canadian aluminum captive to the American market instead taught it to find European homes, and the supply crisis rewarded that diversification. The energy story makes the angle far bigger than aluminum alone. Canada still sends most of its crude oil to the United States, and official Canadian energy analysis acknowledges that this dependence remains a genuine weakness. Roughly 2/3 of American crude imports come from Canada, and the relationship runs deep. But new export capacity is opening the door to global buyers for the first time. The Trans Mountain expansion gives Canadian oil direct access to the Pacific and to Asian markets, breaking the historical reality that Canadian crude had nowhere to go but south. That single pipeline changed the structural position of the entire Canadian oil industry. The gas side of the energy story reaches toward Europe. Canada is pushing LNG exports toward both Asia and Europe. And in July 2026, it announced a new long-term LNG agreement with Germany's Uniper, its second European LNG deal. That agreement shows European buyers are becoming a permanent part of Canada's wider energy strategy. Germany, which nearly collapsed its energy system through overdependence on Russian gas, is now locking in Canadian supply on long-term contracts. For Canada, each of these deals represents a customer that reduces its reliance on the American market and diversifies where its energy actually flows. And if you want the real story behind how Canada is still holding its ground through tariffs, wars, and hard times, hit join below to join the membership for exclusive documentaries you won't see anywhere else about Canada's progress and rise through uncertainty. The timing is what makes this story so consequential right now. Canada and the United States remain far apart in their trade negotiations. Reuters reported that a Canadian minister described the two sides as still distant on a draft trade deal, even as Canada's trade minister met with U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer. A new 50% U.S. tariff threat affecting about $20 billion of Canadian exports is approaching the August 19th deadline. The pressure from Washington is not easing, it is intensifying. Right at the moment, Canada is building its alternatives. And Canada is spending real money to accelerate those alternatives. The federal government announced an investment of over $30 million to help British Columbia businesses navigate trade disruptions and seize new opportunities in international markets. That funding is designed to help Canadian exporters find and develop customers beyond the United States, turning the diversification from a reaction into a deliberate funded strategy. When a government pays to help its businesses reach new markets, it signals that the shift away from American dependence is a long-term policy priority, not a temporary response to a single round of tariffs. The strategic logic ties every piece together. Canada's chief economist's analysis for summer 2026 framed the country's trade diversification as a response to the vulnerability created by over-reliance on a single market. Aluminum flowing to Europe, oil reaching Asia through Trans Mountain, LNG contracted to Germany, and government money funding new market development are all expressions of the same strategy. Each reduces the share of Canada's economy exposed to American tariff policy, and each builds a relationship that does not depend on Washington's approval. The bigger story is not simply that Canada abandoned America. The United States remains Canada's largest trading partner by an enormous margin, and the integration between the two economies is too deep to sever quickly. Roughly 2/3 of American crude imports still come from Canada, and the bilateral relationship spans more than $900 billion in annual trade. Canada is not walking away from that. What it is doing is refusing to remain dependent on it. The real story is that US trade pressure is pushing Canada to build alternatives, and Europe and Asia are increasingly becoming those alternatives. That distinction matters because it explains why the tariffs are backfiring. Washington's leverage over Canada depends on the American market being irreplaceable. Every European aluminum buyer, every Asian crude customer, and every German LNG contract chips away at that irreplaceability. The tariffs were meant to force Canada into concessions by threatening its access to the American market. Instead, they gave Canada the motivation to develop the markets that make that threat less powerful. The more Washington presses, the faster Canada diversifies, and the less each future tariff can accomplish. The aluminum data proves the mechanism works. When American tariffs made the US market unattractive, Canadian producers did not simply absorb the loss. They found European buyers offering better premiums and shipped more than 50% more metal in a single month. That is the template for the entire strategy. Faced with pressure on one market, Canada develops another. The oil going to Asia, the gas going to Germany, and the aluminum going to the Netherlands all follow the same pattern, and the $30 million in federal support is designed to make that pattern repeatable across every sector. The negotiations continue against the August 19th deadline, with the two countries still far apart and a 50% tariff threat hanging over $20 billion in Canadian exports. But Canada enters that deadline in a fundamentally different position than it would have a year ago. Its aluminum has European buyers. Its oil has Pacific access. Its gas has German contracts. Its government is funding the search for still more markets. The dependence that once gave Washington its leverage is being systematically reduced, market by market and contract by contract. Canada replacing America is not a single dramatic event. It is the cumulative effect of aluminum flowing to Europe, crude reaching Asia, LNG heading to Germany, and government money funding the next wave of diversification. Each shift is incremental, but together they describe a country rerouting its economy away from a single dependence and toward a diversified network of global customers. Washington's tariffs were meant to corner Canada. Instead, they became the catalyst that pushed Canada to build the alternatives that change everything about who holds leverage in the relationship.